Unless a judge tells me otherwise, get that pregnant bitch off the bench. That's what Marilyn Cordwin, president of the Meadow Run Enclave HOA board, said to the junior inspector trailing behind her. Loud enough for every neighbor on their evening stroll to hear. Loud enough for Alira, my wife, to flinch as if the metal bench beneath her suddenly burned. Marilyn held her clipboard like a sword, a crisp violation slip flapping in the breeze as she stepped toward us on the walking path. This is an HOA-regulated installation. It's not a rest stop for medical displays. I looked down at Alira's hands, both resting on the side of her swollen belly. She wasn't doing anything except breathing. We'd just finished a slow lap around the outer trail. 34 weeks, one miscarriage behind us, one daughter ahead of us, hopefully, if the HOA didn't kill her first. That bench, I said without moving, was approved in 2019 by community vote. You tried to revoke it last quarter. You failed. And your new clause? It's not law. It's a bluff. Her lip twitched, just for a moment. Then she shifted to a practiced smile, the kind that says, "You're lucky I'm even talking to you. If you live in a neighborhood like mine, gated, silent, immaculately paved, this is where the danger hides. Not in guns or sirens, in bylaws, in laminated name tags, in the arrogance of people like Marilyn who think robes and gavels make a judge. But they're still just bullies in golf carts. She wasn't expecting resistance. Most don't push back. But here's what she didn't know. I didn't just inherit this property. I buried my sister on it. And the last person who tried to tell her how long she was allowed to sit died waiting for an ambulance Marilyn's board locked out. My name's Thorne Grail. I work internal affairs at Homeland Security. I investigate the misuse of procedural authority. I specialize in exposing power that pretends to be lawful. And right now, every word Marilyn is saying is getting logged by the backup mic clipped to my belt. We didn't move to Meadow Run to fight. Alira needed calm. After the last pregnancy ended in silence, her OB recommended walking, breathing, minimizing stress. This neighborhood had wide sidewalks, quiet nights, and a memorial bench built by neighbors in honor of my sister. That's why we came back. But to Marilyn, a woman resting looked like protest, and pregnancy wasn't sacred, it was visual disruption. The first notice called Alira's presence ongoing aesthetic interference. The second labeled it non-approved extended maternity exposure. She called her smile a form of non-verbal solicitation for social leniency. And now, this. A violation notice delivered in front of neighbors, accompanied by a slur. Alira stood slowly, pushing herself up with both hands. She didn't speak. Her eyes stayed fixed on the grass. It wasn't shame, it was restraint. I knew that look. She was trying not to cry in public, trying not to make things worse for me. I took the slip from Marilyn's hand without reading it. "There's a federal statute you're violating," I said quietly. "You're not just endangering a medical pregnancy. You're enforcing discriminatory access restrictions without cause." Marilyn's smile widened. "You're free to appeal, Mr. Grail. If you feel something was unjustly recorded, we have a process." I turned to Alira. "Let's go." Behind us, the metal of the bench creaked as the wind blew through the garden. I said nothing more to Marilyn, but I noted the time. 6:38 p.m. I saved the audio. I flagged the interaction. And as we crossed back through the iron gate into our street, I already knew what was coming next. The hearing, the clause, the escalation. What Marilyn didn't know, what she couldn't imagine when she called my wife that word in front of witnesses, was that there was a judge watching, and when the time came, he would ask me to stand. And when I did, I'd show them the badge. The violation notice came at dawn, folded into a plastic sleeve, zip-tied to our front gate like a condemned building tag. Not mailed, not emailed, delivered by hand. No HOA courier ever dropped one off this early unless it was meant to send a message. "Notice of escalated enforcement," the header read. Below it, a line in bold red, "Violation. Unauthorized maternity staging in a common visual corridor." Alira found it first. She didn't call for me, just stood there barefoot, wrapped in my old hoodie, eyes locked on the paper like it was something rotting. When I opened the door, her fingers were gripping the gate. "They're calling me a display now," she whispered. I took it from her and turned it over. The back listed a fine of $325 per incident, retroactive to the previous 7 days. 7 counts. $2,275 for walking, for sitting, for being visibly pregnant in a neighborhood built for brochures. We didn't speak as I helped her back inside. She moved slowly, the kind of slow where every breath is rationed. Her OB said stress could spike her blood pressure. But how do you stay calm when your own neighborhood turns your pregnancy into a code violation? I scanned the document at my workstation, ran it through OCR, and matched it against the public charter for Meadow Run's residential enforcement clauses. Clause 13F was still not ratified. No signature from the community vote registrar. No timestamp from the board secretary. Just Marilyn's name at the bottom, a single signature, like she was judge, jury, and zoning authority. But she wasn't the only one watching. At 9 a.m., a silver sedan rolled past the gate without pausing. Judge Rathmine Dawes. He moved into Lot 24 3 months ago. Kept quiet, never came to meetings. But I'd seen him watching, seen his eyes narrow when the HOA citation team flagged the kids across the street for bicycle clutter. I hadn't spoken to him yet, didn't need to. Judges like Dawes didn't operate on rumor. They operated on record. I knew that because I'd written internal reviews on his rulings during a DHS audit of municipal data ethics. The man knew how to build a case without making noise. Now he was watching our house. Later that afternoon, HOA security made their first round past the bench. New rule: 30-minute presence limit per household member, enforceable by visual patrol, not law, not ordinance. Just a memo posted to the neighborhood app. No vote, no discussion. A neighbor down the block, Marla Jensen, saw the post and commented, "Is this about the pregnant woman? How is that even legal?" The comment disappeared within 15 minutes. The post stayed up. By evening, the bench was empty. Elira wouldn't go near it. She stayed inside, propped on pillows, ankles elevated. I brought her mint tea and turned on her favorite ocean sound loop, but she barely touched the cup. Her hands kept returning to her belly. "They'll keep going," she said. "Won't they?" "They're already gone," I told her. "They just don't know it yet." She didn't ask what I meant. Just closed her eyes and let the wind push through the window curtains. At 7:22 p.m., I got the ping. My motion logger picked up 3 board members clustered around the bench. Marilyn, her vice president Lyle Bren, and treasurer Eban Kale. Eban looked uncomfortable, even through the blurry zoomed-in shot, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped. Marilyn pointed to the plaque beneath the bench and said something I couldn't make out. Lyle nodded and laughed. Eban didn't react. He turned away. I logged the timestamp, flagged it. That moment mattered, not just because they were plotting, but because Eban Kale didn't laugh. Something in him cracked that night. I could feel it. And when it cracked far enough, he'd tell me what I needed. The first time I saw Eban Kale hesitate, it was over a pen. Not a big moment. Nothing anyone else would notice. But when Marilyn passed him the clipboard that week, after a hastily called special session on enforcing Clause 13F, he held the pen in midair for 3 seconds too long, hovered over the signature line like it might burn him. That's what caught my attention, not his words, his pause. Eban was the treasurer of the Meadow Run Enclave HOA, a former estate attorney, mid-70s, walked with a cane, wore wool vests even in heat waves. The type of man who still used a paper ledger, even though the HOA switched to a cloud system 2 years ago. Most of the board saw him as a harmless holdover, someone they tolerated to preserve the illusion of balance. But I'd worked enough investigations to know the difference between quiet and complicit. 2 days after Elira's violation notice, I found him at the edge of the greenbelt. He was walking slowly, trailing behind the others after the monthly landscaping review. When I caught up to him, I didn't start with accusations. I started with a question. Did the board vote on Clause 13F? He didn't stop walking, but his steps slowed even further. I reviewed the language, he said finally. Marilyn brought it forward as a fast-track measure. Emergency powers under Article 4, Section 2. That section only applies during structural emergencies, I said. Flooding, fire, road collapse. I know. We walked another 20 paces before he looked at me. His eyes were watery, but not soft. Pregnancy isn't an eyesore, he said, and it sure as hell isn't a public hazard. I nodded. Then why'd you sign it? He didn't answer right away. His knuckles tightened around the cane. "She made it about precedent," he muttered. "Said if we allowed emotional exceptions, it would open the door to other challenges, like that service dog case last year." She compared it to performance art. "She called my wife's pregnancy performance art?" "She didn't say it like that in the minutes." He looked away. "But yes." That was the moment I realized Eban wasn't loyal. He was afraid. Marilyn had surrounded herself with loyalists: Bren, Caulfield, Lowry, people who agreed without thinking. But Eban thought, he remembered, that made him dangerous to her, and useful to me. "I don't need you to speak out yet," I said. "But you kept the original drafts, didn't you?" Another pause. He didn't deny it. "I keep everything," he said. I let him walk away. That evening, I found a sealed envelope on my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a single sheet. The original draft of Clause 13F, marked with "Pending Board Review, Do Not Post," no signatures, no timestamp, and a handwritten note at the bottom: "Never ratified, never should have been." I didn't smile. There was nothing satisfying about it, just confirmation. She lied. Marilyn took an unapproved draft and enforced it like law, and everyone played along. Except one. That night, Elira sat by the window watching the wind shift through the garden. She hadn't gone outside in 2 days. The shadows on her face were longer than they used to be. The color in her cheeks faded. I told her what I'd found, about the draft, about Eban. "Will it change anything?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "but not in here, out there." Because what Marilyn didn't understand was that I wasn't building a defense. I was preparing a record. Every form, every notice, every minute of audio, every clause typed without authority, every laugh Lyle gave when he thought no one was listening, every hesitation Eban couldn't hide. I wasn't filing appeals. I was writing a case summary. Because no matter how pretty the gates were, Meadow Run wasn't a neighborhood. It was a liability waiting for someone with the right badge to pull the thread. They didn't wait a week. 3 days after I received the unratified draft of Clause 13F, Elira got another violation, this one accusing her of repetitive visual obstruction via stationary presence. The language shifted every time, like they were testing how far they could stretch compliance vocabulary before someone snapped. This one came with photos, grainy surveillance stills taken from the community walking path. Elira sitting on the Equinox bench, Elira pausing on the sidewalk with her hand to her side. Elira kneeling slightly as if adjusting a shoe, the timestamp reading 6:41 p.m. The same evening Marilyn passed by us with her clipboard and said that word out loud. The violation fine was higher now, $500 per occurrence, and the attached letter stated clearly, "Due to ongoing noncompliance with behavioral expectations outlined in 13F, additional restrictions will be applied, including, but not limited to, movement monitoring, amenity suspensions, and access limitations to common areas." I stared at the letter for a long time, not because of what it said, but because of how it said it. They were escalating, and I'd seen escalation before, usually in the form of power-hungry administrators who realized their only remaining leverage was force disguised as formality. I logged into the Meadow Run community portal, pulled the meeting minutes, and checked the update history on the clause. It had been finalized 2 days prior, after Eban gave me the original draft. Marilyn was backdating and pushing it through post factum, using a false quorum meeting logged by only 2 present members. That's illegal under HOA regulation law in our state. Board action without quorum invalidates passage. I printed it, highlighted the inconsistencies, then turned to Elira. She was on the floor, knees tucked beneath her, sorting baby clothes into a plastic bin labeled Week 36. It wasn't her normal rhythm. She was doing it too fast, too deliberately, like she needed a task to distract her body from the way it was being watched. "They're following me," she said, not looking up. "I know." She folded a onesie twice, then stopped. "I can't prove it, but I know. Every time I go out alone, someone passes by on a golf cart with a clipboard. Different people, same cart, I know that cart." I knelt beside her. She leaned against me. The fabric of the onesie was still warm from her hands. "I'm going to take care of it," I said. I meant it, but I also knew she needed more than promises. She needed movement. That evening, I filed formal complaints with 3 separate agencies: HUD's Fair Housing Division for Disability and Pregnancy Discrimination, the State Attorney General's Civil Enforcement Unit, and the Office of Inspector General's HOA Oversight Committee, which handled board corruption investigations in communities with federal infrastructure overlays. Meadow Run qualified. The storm drains and retention pond, federally subsidized post-2009. That meant the HOA operated within partially regulated property lines, and that meant the violations weren't just civil. They could trigger jurisdictional review. At 2:14 a.m., I received an auto response with a case ID from HUD. At 3:22 a.m., a message arrived from a junior case analyst. They asked for documentation, patterns, audio, timestamps, board minutes, anything that suggested systemic enforcement without lawful authority. I replied with 8 PDF attachments, all logged, watermarked, and fully indexed, and I copied the judge. Rathman Dawes hadn't said a word to me yet, but I knew he was watching, and now he had what he needed to step forward if this turned into litigation. I didn't sleep, not from stress, from readiness. Because when morning came, I had a copy of the board's latest enforcement clause in one hand and a fully traceable paper trail in the other, and I knew exactly how to use both. The HOA posted the amendment publicly at 6:01 a.m., Clause 13F, now labeled Community Visual Standards, Medical and Maternity Compliance, was pinned to the community bulletin board outside the clubhouse and uploaded to the Meadow Run resident portal. The timestamp claimed it was approved unanimously 2 weeks earlier. 3 signatures sat at the bottom: Marilyn Cordwin, Lyle Bren, and C. Lowry, all board loyalists. But something was missing. Iban Kale's name wasn't there. No present but abstained. No blank space, just absence, as if he didn't exist on the board anymore. That was the crack. By noon, the clause had already drawn 3 resident complaints online. A woman from Lot 38 asked if it meant she had to cover her wheelchair if she sat on her porch. A man from Lot 12 asked whether limping from a surgery could be considered non-compliant posture. Each comment vanished within the hour. So did their profiles. The HOA's new community moderator feature was live. It gave Marilyn the ability to restrict visibility to any resident flagged as disruptive. I scrolled through the language of the clause again. It didn't just reference Elira's situation. It mentioned benches, walking paths, and involuntary visual triggers. That phrase again: cold, bureaucratic, designed to sound like policy while hiding its real purpose. Exclusion by intimidation. I ran the file through metadata recovery. The PDF had been authored in a different system than the previous charters. Not the HOA's usual formatting software, not the usual watermark. I recognized it. It was drafted in LexRegis Pro, an offline legal tool used by attorneys who want to avoid cloud backups. Only one resident in Meadow Run still used it, Eban Kale. But that wasn't what made me sit back in my chair. What did was the creation date. 2 weeks ago, 4:27 p.m., the exact time Eban had signed out early from the HOA meeting. I remembered it because I saw him struggle with his keys in the parking lot as I walked Elira back from her OB appointment. I wasn't at that vote, but the document said the vote happened that day, which meant Marilyn forged it. That gave me what I needed. At 3 p.m., I visited Lot 11, an older home with a cracked mailbox and faded blue shutters. Eban's house. I didn't knock, not yet. I just stood at the edge of the walkway until he came to the door. "You saw the new clause?" he asked before I spoke. I did. "It's worse than I thought," he muttered. "She didn't even wait for me to leave town." "Your name's missing," he nodded. "On purpose?" He leaned against the doorframe, cane balanced carefully, eyes narrowed. "She asked me to stay late that day, wanted me to preview the final language. I told her it was overreach. She said it was necessary, that we had to train the community to stop reacting emotionally to disruption. That's the word she used, disruption. Do you still have the preview file?" "I printed it," he said. "Out of habit, I print everything." He disappeared inside. When he returned, he handed me a single sheet. It matched the current clause almost word for word, except for one line that had since been removed. "Initial enforcement will focus on known maternity presence in Lot 7. My house." That single sentence was a kill switch. It proved targeting. I took the paper without a word. Eban didn't ask me what I planned to do with it. He just said, "She's going to force someone into a lawsuit, and by then, it'll be too late for your wife." "She's already late," I said. That night, I filed an amended report with HUD. I marked the clause as falsified, attached the earlier draft, and noted the difference in author metadata and formatting software. I flagged the language singling out Lot 7. I included Alira's medical accommodation request and the HOA's refusal, and I sent a copy to Judge Dawes. No commentary, no explanation, just the raw truth. Because it wasn't about arguing anymore. It was about escalation, and who would break first. The warning letter arrived just before sunset, slipped under our door instead of posted at the gate. No envelope, just one sheet, thick stock, stamped with the Meadow Run crest at the top and one line in bold at the center. Failure to remove unauthorized emergency modifications may result in physical extraction. It referred to the amber beacon I'd installed that morning, an emergency light that pulsed twice per minute. It was small, legal, and well within ADA accommodation guidelines. The power draw was minimal, and it only activated when Elira's wearable monitor sent a proximity signal. It was for the paramedics, not decoration. But Marilyn had declared it a non-approved signaling device, inconsistent with community optics. She'd posted about it on the resident forum too. The thread's title read, "Unregistered light fixtures, unwelcome messaging and shared visual fields." Under it were half a dozen replies from bored loyalists calling it trauma bait, panic marketing, and my personal favorite, pregnancy privilege theater. Elira hadn't seen the thread. I didn't show her. She hadn't slept well in 2 nights. Braxton Hicks were coming more often. She'd curled up on the couch that afternoon with a compress on her lower back, trying to keep her blood pressure steady. I didn't want to give her more reasons to worry, but I read every word, and I logged every user ID. At 9:12 p.m., I walked the perimeter of our property, made sure the beacon was functioning, and checked the battery backups. I installed a secondary trigger that would alert local responders if the main unit was disabled, because I didn't trust Marilyn not to make it disappear. When I came back inside, Elira was sitting at the window again, her gaze fixed on the walking path. "Eban was out there earlier," she said softly. "He didn't come to the door, just stood across from the bench for a while, then left." She looked at me. "He looked scared." "He is," I said, "but not of us." There was a knock at the door at 10:44 p.m. Not HOA, not Eban, Judge Dawes. I opened the door and stepped outside, letting it close quietly behind me. He wore a gray coat over dark slacks, no folder, no phone in hand, just a quiet kind of presence that made your lungs want to inhale slower. "She's provoking litigation," he said simply. I nodded. "And daring us to blink first." "She's daring the wrong man." We stood in silence for a moment, both of us looking out at the path. The beacon pulsed gently in the dark, a gold heartbeat, faint but visible. "She thinks you'll go public," Dawes said. "Make noise, rage post, she's baiting an overreaction." "I won't give her one," he looked at me. "But you have a move coming, don't you?" I held his gaze. "She broke quorum law, forged vote records, rewrote a clause that targets my wife by lot number, and now she's threatening medical infrastructure." His eyes narrowed. "You filed?" 3 agencies. SHUD opened a case. AG is reviewing procedural abuse. Inspector General's HOA unit is quietly tracking the timestamps. He gave the smallest nod. "Good." Then he said something I wasn't expecting. "When the time comes, if she crosses the last line, I'll ask you to stand. You'll know what to do." He didn't explain. He didn't need to. He turned and walked down the steps, disappearing into the night without another word. I stood there for a long time. The air was cold, the kind that slides under your shirt collar and reminds you winter is near. But the light on the post stayed warm, constant, silent, a warning, a promise. And in the quiet between pulses, I could already feel the next line she'd try to cross. Eban came to my door the next morning. He didn't knock, just stood there, gripping the handrail like he'd aged 10 years overnight. The wind caught his coat as I opened the door, but he didn't flinch. "I need to talk," he said. "Somewhere off property." I nodded, grabbed my keys, and we drove to the edge of town, just far enough to be out of Meadow Run's jurisdiction. He didn't say a word until we pulled into the parking lot of an old nature preserve station, long since decommissioned. The kind of place no one checked anymore. No cameras, no benches, just a cracked path and a bench that didn't belong to anyone. We sat. "She's gone too far," he said. I didn't answer. He needed to say it out loud. "She told the board last night that if Ilera triggered the emergency beacon again, she'd file a complaint with the Utility Commission. Said the blinking destabilized the visual field of passing drivers. That she had legal grounds to demand its removal. She doesn't." "I know," he said, voice low. "But she's rewriting procedure faster than we can stop her. She logs minutes without meetings, edits vote counts after the fact. The last 3 enforcements were passed with forged timestamps." "You're sure?" He reached into his coat and handed me a folder. Inside were 5 printed sheets, internal version histories of clause files, highlighted metadata, inconsistent edit trails, names attached to logs that I knew hadn't been present at the time. "This is what she didn't know," he said. "I never gave up the backup drive. When the HOA moved to the cloud system, I copied everything to a local archive, not out of mistrust, just habit." His hand trembled slightly. "But now I'm glad I did." I turned to him. "You know what this means. She'll come after me, remove me from the board, possibly file civil harassment. She won't get the chance." He shook his head. "She always finds a way. Lyle, Caulfield, they'd burn the charter before letting me testify. You won't have to." I opened my phone and uploaded the files to my active HUD case, added his name, his signed statement, a dated transcript of our conversation. The moment I hit send, it became part of the federal record. Unalterable, discoverable. Eban watched me carefully. "You're building something bigger than a complaint." "I'm building a noose," he swallowed. "Why me?" he asked. "Why trust me now?" "Because you paused." He blinked. "What?" "That night, when she handed you the clipboard, you hesitated, just long enough to show you knew it was wrong." He looked away. "It wasn't courage. It was conscience. I can work with that." We sat in silence after that, the air between us heavy with something that felt like reluctant alliance. Before we left, I gave him one instruction. "Don't attend the next meeting. Let her think you've backed down. She's not afraid of open resistance. She's afraid of silence she can't read." He nodded slowly, and then he said, the one thing I didn't expect from a man like Eban, Kale. "I'm sorry I signed anything. I knew where it was headed. I just didn't think it would land on your wife." "It didn't," he frowned. "I don't understand." "It landed on me." When we returned to Meadow Run, the beacon was still pulsing gently against the early evening light. I watched it for a moment, then I turned and went inside. I didn't check the forums, didn't refresh the complaint list, didn't wait for Marilyn to make her next move, because now I had what I needed, and she had no idea the walls were already closing in. I didn't sleep that night, not out of stress, out of focus. I spent the dark hours mapping out every thread, every clause, every enforcement notice logged in the Meadow Run portal since Marilyn took over the board 18 months ago. I traced the language shifts, the way non-conformity became disruption, then disruption became destabilization, and finally, destabilization became grounds for immediate correction. Each change had a date, each date had a vote, and most of those votes, I had evidence they never happened. But the trap wouldn't be sprung with evidence alone. Not in Meadow Run. The board knew how to bury documents and silence residents. What they didn't know how to handle was the one thing they couldn't control: jurisdiction. At 5:14 a.m., I finished uploading the timeline summary to my HUD case dashboard. Then I added the final component: property maps, the retention pond, the storm overflow channel, the floodgate sensor grid behind the east wall, all federally funded under the 2009 Community Resilience Act, all part of shared utility infrastructure, which meant any rule that impacted emergency response access within 30 feet of that grid, like the bench zone, the walking path, or our emergency beacon, fell under secondary federal review authority. They didn't just violate HOA procedure, they breached infrastructure compliance, and that brought the Office of Infrastructure and Emergency Access, OIEA, into the conversation. At 6:47 a.m., I made the call, not from my personal line, not from a traceable endpoint, from the one connection point I still maintained through DHS, the one that guaranteed a quiet preliminary look without tipping anyone locally. By 7:12, I had a name. Case analyst Kendricks Marr, former FEMA compliance liaison. I sent the packet, included the full timeline, the forged clause logs, Eban's draft, the altered vote sheets, and audio from Elira's last violation warning. I didn't write a message. The packet spoke for itself. At 10:36 a.m., Kendricks replied, "Got it. Reviewing jurisdiction triggers now. We'll update once secondary overlays confirmed." I stared at the screen for a few long seconds, then closed the tab. Next was the judge. I didn't send him everything, just enough. A side-by-side comparison of Clause 13F's draft versus published versions. The audio clip where Marilyn referenced Elira as the pregnant display. And a photo of the bulletin board the day the clause was posted, highlighting the missing signature line. No message. I knew he'd read it. That afternoon, I re-walked the neighborhood trail. The sky was flat gray, windless, silent. The kind of stillness that made Meadow Run feel like a soundstage, real only at a distance. The bench sat empty. A new laminated sign had been taped above it. Resting here may violate community comfort guidelines. Community comfort. I tore it down without hesitation. Later, as Elira napped on the couch, I checked the portal again. Marilyn had uploaded a new proposal, lot-based adjustment of shared path access. It included a heat map of resident disruption zones, clearly marking Lot 7, our home, as a priority red zone. It was masked in language, but the message was clear. Restrict us. Box us in. That's when I knew she'd crossed the line, and I'd already laced the ground with tripwires. The documents were logged. The analyst was watching. The judge had been handed the match. All I had to do now was wait for Marilyn to strike in public. One more overreach, one more violation issued in her name. And then, finally, I'd stand. By the next morning, Meadow Run was holding its breath. No new violations were posted, no digital notices, no neighborhood patrols buzzing past our windows. It was as if the HOA had hit pause, quiet, still, cautious. But silence in a place like this wasn't peace. It was calculation. Marilyn wasn't retreating. She was positioning. So was I. At 6:03 a.m., I received a message from Kendricks Marr. Jurisdiction overlay confirmed. Beacon location and bench path fall within federal emergency buffer zone. HOA clause likely unenforceable. Full summary being routed to OIEA supervisor for escalation. Will advise. I stared at the words until they settled in my chest. This was the opening I needed, the confirmation that would strip the last veneer off Marilyn's authority. Her policy was not just cruel, it was void. But I couldn't deploy that yet, not without setting the stage. I made 2 stops before 9 a.m. First, I dropped a copy of the jurisdiction overlay report in Judge Dawes' lockbox. No note, no context, just the map, the clause excerpt, and the ruling that classified Marilyn's amendments as null if enforced in proximity to the federal grid. Second, I visited Eban. He answered the door like he'd been expecting it. "She's planning something," he said before I spoke. "She's going to announce an emergency compliance meeting." He nodded. "How bad?" "She'll try to suspend my wife's access to all common paths, cite behavioral risk, maybe threaten property censure." His jaw tightened. "And you'll let her. I need her to say it, out loud, in front of Dawes." He opened the door wider. "Come in." His office was covered in files, but one folder sat front and center on his desk. He slid it toward me, without ceremony. "Enforcement records from the last 2 quarters," he said. "I used my old case formatting. I had to print them behind Marilyn's back. The ones in the cloud have already been altered." I flipped through them. Lyle's signature stamped over sections he never touched. Names of residents who never received notice still listed as served. One entire page of timestamps, edited to compress a hearing that had lasted nearly 2 hours into 38 minutes. Forgery on top of fraud. "This enough for the analyst?" he asked. "It's more than enough." I added the records to my case packet and re-encrypted the archive under a fresh chain ID, one I could share securely with the Federal Compliance Unit if this went live. Then I prepared the rest. I synchronized all clips, images, PDFs, and digital logs into a visual deck, 38 pages long, labeled, sequential, and time-stamped. I named the file Violation Chain, Meadow Run Enclave, Lot 7, and queued it to two endpoints, Kendricks's secure inbox and a backup node linked to Judge Dawes' personal court directory. Both encrypted, both fail-safe. All that was left was the trigger. At 2:14 p.m., the notice arrived. Special HOA compliance session, immediate attendance required. No details, no agenda, just a start time, 6 p.m. At the clubhouse, residents strongly encouraged to attend. Elira read it and closed her eyes. She's going to try to humiliate me. She's going to try to win, I said, but she doesn't know she's already lost. Elira looked down at her stomach, one hand brushing across the curve. Should I come? No, I said softly. You've done enough. She nodded, but I saw it in her eyes. The ache, the shame, the weight of being turned into a problem by people who called themselves neighbors. I kissed her forehead, then walked outside and checked the beacon. Still pulsing, still legal, still protected. By 5:42 p.m., I was dressed and headed toward the clubhouse. I didn't bring a folder. I didn't bring my badge. All I brought was a single name, and the certainty that Marilyn would speak it tonight, in front of the wrong man, at the worst possible moment for her. And when she did, I'd be ready. The clubhouse lights were already on when I arrived. Not the warm amber bulbs they use during holiday socials or community movie nights. These were fluorescent, humming hard above the podium and casting harsh shadows along the back wall. The kind of lights used for inspections, not conversations. Marilyn stood near the front, clipboard in hand, speaking to Lyle Bren in tight, clipped tones. I caught pieces of it as I took a seat 3 rows from the front. No interruptions this time. We'll move straight to the enforcement phase. No need for debate. Lyle gave her a stiff nod, eyes flicking nervously toward the room as it filled. I scanned the rows. Quiet families, solo homeowners, a few retirees. Near the back, clutching printed agendas. No one looked comfortable. That was Marilyn's way. She didn't care about compliance. She cared about dominance disguised as order. Then I saw him. Judge Dawes entered without a word, wearing a dark suit and an expression like cold iron. He didn't approach anyone, just took a seat near the aisle, close to the front, where he had a clear view of the board and the podium. I didn't wave. He didn't nod. But he was here, and that was enough. Marilyn stepped forward and tapped the microphone. This session is called to address an ongoing pattern of non-compliance, behavioral provocation, and systemic disruption by residents of Lot 7. You've all seen the issues, the photos, the posted violations. Tonight, we finalize the path forward. Her voice echoed in the room, steady, practiced, measured like a speech rehearsed in front of a mirror too many times. As of this evening, she continued, the board proposes a unanimous vote to suspend Lot 7's access to shared walking trails, seated common areas, and amenity easements. This measure is temporary but necessary to preserve visual order and prevent further emotional contagion. There it was again. Emotional contagion, a term she'd slipped into several enforcement letters, cold, clinical, meant to make grief sound like a disease. She turned the page on her clipboard. Lot 7 has repeatedly deployed unapproved emergency lighting. It's within federal ADA compliance, I said, loud enough to be clear, not loud enough to be accused of disruption. Marilyn didn't look at me, not yet. And has encouraged unauthorized sympathy demonstrations, she continued, by remaining visually present at contested community landmarks. A murmur went through the room. She pressed on. This has resulted in complaints from 5 households, increased digital conflict, and the reemergence of medically provocative aesthetics on community property. Then she looked at me and smiled. Some will say this is targeted, she said, voice rising just slightly, that it's personal. But let me be absolutely clear. No one here wants to punish a pregnant woman. We simply want her removed from the shared spaces until the disruption passes. She paused, let that hang, then added almost too casually, and if any judge disagrees, let them stand. Let them tell us to keep tolerating the pregnant bitch in the middle of our walking path. The room went still. Her words dropped like a steel weight. Several heads turned, some mouths fell open. One woman near the back closed her eyes. But it was the silence that mattered most, because it wasn't just residents listening. Judge Dawes stood, slowly, calmly, like he'd been waiting for that exact moment. I'll take you up on that, he said. Marilyn's face went pale. He stepped forward, pulling a small leather folio from his coat, opened it, displayed his badge. "I'm sitting municipal judge for this district, and what you just said, on record in a public meeting, violates state civil rights protections, ADA guidelines, and potentially federal housing discrimination law." He turned to me, voice level. "Mr. Grail." I stood. "Would you please confirm your identity for the room?" "Thorne Grail," I said. "Internal Affairs, DHS. Badge ID ending in 796. Gasps rippled through the chairs. Marilyn didn't move. Dawes didn't let the silence stretch long. "This hearing is over." And just like that, the power in her voice vanished. She didn't speak. Not as Dawes closed the folio, not when the room erupted in half-whispers and wide-eyed stares. Not even when I turned to face her, fully now, the badge still clipped to my belt where everyone could see it. Marilyn Cordwin, who once barked citations at 7-year-olds for sidewalk chalk, stood frozen behind the podium like a statue cracked at the knees. Lyle Bren cleared his throat and tried to interject, but Dawes didn't even look at him. "This isn't up for negotiation," the judge said firmly. "You falsified board actions, manipulated enforcement to target protected status, and as of this evening, issued public remarks that fall under discriminatory harassment." Marilyn blinked. Just once. Her lips parted like she might speak, but whatever words were waiting got swallowed by the weight in the room. I stepped forward. "I've submitted full documentation to 3 federal agencies. SHUD's already acknowledged jurisdiction. OIEA's overlay map classifies the walking trail and bench as protected infrastructure zones. Clause 13F holds no legal authority where a federal compliance applies." I turned to the rest of the room. "And more importantly, what you all witnessed tonight, what was said about my wife, and about the space we used to manage her pregnancy, is already logged. Audio, visual, time-stamped." Judge Dawes nodded. "And I'll be attaching a judicial affidavit to that record. That statement was made in my presence. That meeting was held under pretense of lawful enforcement." A woman near the back stood, Marla Jensen. I remembered her comment on the portal, the one that disappeared. "Are we allowed to say something?" she asked. "Or are we still being flagged as disruptive?" Dawes gestured gently. "You're welcome to speak, ma'am." She stepped forward, holding a folded paper in her hands. "I'm not pregnant. I'm not disabled. I'm just tired. Tired of being told that benches are dangerous and garden flags are offensive and that showing kindness is some kind of disease we'll all catch." Several heads nodded behind her. Marilyn hadn't moved. Lyle looked at her, visibly unsettled, but still didn't speak. I saw Eban then. Standing in the side aisle, hands folded in front of him, watching everything like a man who had nothing left to prove. He gave me a slow, subtle nod. It was done. "This board is suspended pending investigation," Dawes announced. "Effective immediately. Any further enforcement activity is to cease. All active fines are frozen until reviewed by the state's HOA Oversight Committee." A collective breath swept through the room, like a wind no one had been expecting. Marilyn finally found her voice, but it was small, brittle. "You don't have the right—" Dawes turned to her. "I have more than the right, Mrs. Cordwin. I have the authority. And you have the burden of proof. You'll be notified when your deposition is scheduled." She opened her mouth again, but said nothing. I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who had built an empire out of checkboxes and clipboards, now staring into the face of the very system she thought she controlled. She'd spent years turning this place into a quiet kind of prison. Now she was being asked to leave her own keys behind. I stepped aside and let Dawes pass. He walked to the back of the room, folded his coat over one arm, and paused just before leaving. "Mr. Grail." "Yes, sir. Thank you for standing when I asked." He left without another word. I turned, glanced at Eban, and gave him a nod. Then I left too. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. The beacon on our porch was still pulsing, soft, steady, unchanged. I walked toward it, hands in my pockets, and felt the weight of every moment leading to this. Every paper, every stare, every silent walk Elira took when she thought no one would defend her. She wouldn't have to walk alone anymore. Neither would anyone else. Elira was asleep when I got home. She'd curled into the couch, one arm wrapped around the folded baby blanket she'd washed that morning, the soft blue one with stitched stars. The room was dark except for the glow of the emergency beacon outside, its pulse steady, slow, still legal, still standing. I didn't wake her, just sat beside her and listened to her breathe. For the first time in weeks, her face wasn't tense. No crease between her brows, no twitch at the corner of her mouth, no weight pressing down from a neighborhood trying to sanitize her out of existence. Just sleep. Real, uninterrupted sleep. Outside, Meadow Run was quiet. No patrol carts, no rustling clipboards, no whispered HOA meetings behind closed blinds. I opened my phone and refreshed the community board one more time. At the top was a new post. HOA board temporarily suspended. Interim resident oversight in progress. Below that, a pinned message from Judge Dawes. If you believe you've been subjected to unlawful enforcement action, please submit your concerns to the oversight address below. No retaliation will be tolerated. And at the bottom, thank you to those who chose to stand. You were never alone. I sat back and let the words settle. The beacon pulsed against the porch rail, casting that warm amber rhythm across the yard. I didn't build Meadow Run. I didn't choose the walls or the gates or the bylaws buried 30 pages deep in boilerplate. But I chose to stay when it counted. I chose to fight from inside the house they thought they controlled, and now they would answer for it. Marilyn hadn't been seen since the meeting. Rumor was she'd tried to scrub the resident portal, but the audit lockout hit before she could log in. Lyle resigned quietly the next morning. Caulfield issued a formal apology in a folded note left at Eban's door. They knew. And the residents? They started talking again. People who hadn't said a word in months posted photos of their kids on the walking path. A family set out lawn chairs near the retention pond. Someone hung a handmade sign over the bench. Reserved for hope. Eban delivered the last document to me personally. A formal transfer of all enforcement logs, with notarized entries verifying chain of custody. He handed it to me on the porch. Elira deserves peace, he said. She'll have it, I told him. He looked up at the pulsing light. And so will this place. For the first time in a long while. Then he walked back down the steps and disappeared into the street. I sat with that thought for a while. Not about punishment, not about revenge, about repair, about what it means to live in a place and not be policed by it, about benches that shouldn't carry fines, about walking while pregnant without fear of being cited, about gates that didn't just keep danger out, but compassion too. The story didn't start with a badge. It started with a bench, with Elira resting, and it ended here, with her still resting, still here, still safe. If you've ever had your peace stripped from you in the name of rules, if you've watched someone you love get turned into a violation because their existence made someone uncomfortable, know this. You don't need to fight loud to win. You just need to last longer than their silence. Subscribe now if you believe stories like this matter, because silence is what they count on. And what you just read, that was the sound of it breaking.